Hello, my name is Putkonen. Thank you for joining me. Today I'm talking about the linchpin of our bondage. And regarding our bondage, I'm actually primarily talking about two things. The first is what's referred to by a lot of spiritual seekers as this feeling of stuckness, being trapped, bound, limited in some way. Fundamentally, not being free. I'm stuck, and I'm trying to become free. The second is the bondage of suffering, because we have this chronic suffering in life, this chronic anxiety or guilt or suffering of different kinds. And so, how do we get out of that? And so, if you accept that there's all these bonds, it's like chains. I'm going to use this imagery of an escape artist. Because if you see an escape artist in a magician show, and he has all these chains, he's weighed down with tons of chains upon chains, he may struggle, strain, he may get free of a chain or two, but then the curtain falls and you don't see what happens. And in some of the old magic tricks, what it came down to was a linchpin. While you saw all the chains on them, they were all held in place by a single pin. And so if you pulled the pin, all the chains fall off. There's nothing there holding them on. And then the magician would be free and be able to run backstage and get behind the audience, so that way when the curtain or whatever is revealed, he's gone and he's appeared somewhere else, free of the chains. But in this imagery, what I'm trying to point out to is this idea of a linchpin that's holding all the bonds together. And so if you accept, yes, I feel bound, and I am bound by suffering, I want to point out that all the bondage is held in place by a linchpin. What is the linchpin? Well, the linchpin is the idea of me. This fundamental idea of a me is what holds all the bondage together. What is it that's being bound other than a me? And so if there's this massive chains around an object, if the object disappeared, the me disappeared, all the chains would fall to the ground. Fundamentally, a me is required in order to be bound. And that's why a lot of times I'll point out or say that the me itself is bondage. The idea of a me creates all the bondage. And so if you pull the linchpin of me, the chains fall away. But what I'm not saying is that you should never focus on the chains. Because if you've ever tried to pull a cotter pin or a linchpin out of something, let's say that, be it a trailer or whatever that's pulling back on something, or if two chains are being pulled apart and you're trying to pull the pin that's attaching them, these forces pulling on it tends to create a lot more stress and friction, making the pin very hard to pull out. And so it is easier to get the pin out. It's more conducive to get the pin out if you're able to loosen up some of the chains and maybe even drop a few. So I'm not saying it's totally worthless to even focus on the chains, but what I am saying is you don't want to put undue focus on the chains. It's not about getting rid of all the chains, because it's a great mass of chains. It's a Gordian knot of chains. And so as long as you're trying to get rid of the chains one at a time, you could spend the rest of your life peeling off chains, and there's still chains to be pulled off yet. Because everything has been built up over this time. And actually some of our practices might be subtly building on and adding new chains. This is actually why in some of the Hindu and Buddhist traditions they'll talk about the golden chains of karma and the steel chains of karma. So the gold chains are good karma and the steel chains are bad karma. And so what they're alluding to is all the good that you're doing can become new chains. And so that's why I also point at things like not trying to get something out of meditation, not doing it for a purpose. Meditate without purpose. Because what happens is if you're trying to get something out of it and you start making any kind of progress, the me claims it as, look at the progress I've made, and then you're suddenly building up chains again. You're building up the me instead of dismantling the me. And so it's kind of a tricky double-edged sword, I think, to make progress, so to speak. Because even if it's like, oh, look at all the chains I've gotten off, well, then you're starting to add them back on again. You've now put on the gold chains of, look at the progress I've made. And so while it helps, perhaps, to loosen up and maybe free yourself of a couple of chains, you don't want to unduly focus on the chains, because the point isn't to get rid of the chains one at a time. The point is to pull out the linchpin. And this is why this is very similar to the last video I made, where I'm saying, who am I is the fundamental question. You need to focus on this me that's bound and see through that me. See the false as false. It is important, I think, to, if you insist on doing something, if you feel I must do something, then look at this me you feel and think yourself to be. And so if you believe you are conscious awareness, for example, you need to look at it, observe, investigate, question, look for the exceptions to the rule that you've created, to the concepts and beliefs that you're holding on to. Because you have the concept and belief, I am conscious awareness. Well, on what basis do you believe you are this? And you have to look at the roots of those concepts and beliefs and root them out. And it's not a mental exercise. It is more visceral, more intuitive. It is non-conceptual. The mind, you cannot mentally get your way free of this stuff. It's almost like a re-experiencing. And so an example of this is, if you believed you were conscious awareness, well, then you would try to think about deep dreamless sleep when there is no conscious awareness. And maybe remember last night, during the night, there's this blank spot where there was no conscious awareness because there's nothing. It was deep dreamless sleep. And so the fundamental question becomes, did I cease to exist? Is the conscious awareness that I believe I am now the exact same conscious awareness that I was yesterday? Was I continuous from there to now? If it's continuous and not two different conscious awarenesses, well, then it must have carried through when there was no conscious awareness. Something carried through that lack of conscious awareness. And so in this way, you may find that you are not conscious awareness, because even in the absence of conscious awareness, you still are. And so in this way, you need to observe, look at, investigate, delve into, question, kind of play devil's advocate, look for an exception, a way to counter your own beliefs and concepts. In this way, you're kind of working on that pin, trying to pull out the linchpin. And that just weakens it up, or makes it loose. And in the loosening, some of the chains may fall off. But at no point will the me ever get rid of all the chains one at a time. It's better to focus on the linchpin. But if you insist on doing something, look at this me. If you're okay with not doing something, it would be better to just be still, silent, fully aware, and not even thinking. Because then you're just looking at what is. And so in this way, you're looking, there's two different things going on. You're just looking to maybe see what is as it is. But on the other hand, when you're doing, you're seeing the false as false. And so you're seeing the false as false, which helps seeing what is as it is, because if you're just looking and you've got these false ideas, they kind of tint, blind, and overshadow what you're looking at. And so the two kind of go hand in hand, is just looking, being still, silent, fully aware, maybe occasionally questioning, who am I, and seeing what pops up, because a single question of who am I in that state of just being aware, well, there's no thought. And so is there even a me at that point? Experientially, this is an experiential kind of thing. When there is no thought, is there a me? And so you can play with these kind of things. But it's the linchpin that's important and not the chains. And so I would recommend focusing on this linchpin. I kind of like the idea of keeping in mind this idea of a linchpin, because so many times we start over focusing on the chains. Oh, I need to get free of this, I need to get free of that, I need to do this, I need to do that. And it's like, well, that's the chains. Just focus on the pin. If the pin comes out, the whole structure falls. In this way, I think that's what Adyashanti was kind of pointing at one point, because he says so many of these spiritual practices is like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Because you're just rearranging and making things more comfortable and suitable on a sinking ship. At some point the ship's going to be gone. And that's kind of pointing at the same thing. The whole point isn't to focus on all the chains, because that's just a temporary thing. At some point the chains will fall away and they won't matter, because there won't be a me there left to bind. So something to keep in mind. But if you have any questions, comments, please post below. Until next time, thank you much.